Welcome to Shahnameh, Book of Kings. Today we begin with the reign of Yazdegerd the Unjust. Yazdegerd rejoiced at his brother's unhappy death, taking his crown and placing it on his own head. All those who had lived by the sword and mace trembled like willow trees. Yazdegerd over the world became more secure, and his benevolence faded away as his authority increased. Wise men meant nothing to him, and his royal obligations were forgotten. Lords of the marches, champions, scholars, and learned priests, all were like so much wind to him, and his dark soul gave itself over to tyranny. Justice and kindness were cancelled from his heart, and he granted no man his request. He respected no one's rank, and faults were elaborately punished. His ministers, whose task was to increase his power and glory, agreed among themselves never to tell the king of the country's true condition. They all shrank from him in terror and lived in fear for their lives. As soon as the chamberlain heard that envoys had come to see the king, or that subordinates had arrived at court seeking help, he hurried to reassure them with kind and gentle words. Later he said, "The king is not in the mood for work, and you cannot have an audience with him. I have told him of your request, and he will act appropriately." 7 years went by, during which time the country's priests lived in fear and torment because of Yazdegerd's cruelty. Then, at the beginning of the 8th year of his reign, at the spring equinox, a son was born to him under an auspicious star. Delighted with his little son, Yazdegerd named him Bahram. 2 renowned astrologers were summoned before the king. Soroush was the best of Indian astrologers, a man of great glory and intelligence. Hoshar was a Persian, and his knowledge was such that he could put a bridle on the heavens. They used their astrolabes and Greek astrological tables to uncover the happy fortune that Bahram would be a great prince in the world, and that he would rule over the 7 climes. Still grasping their instruments and tables, they ran into the king's presence and said, "We have brought together all we know, and it is clear from the stars, and that the heavens look kindly on this baby, and he will rule the 7 climes, and be a great and glorious king." Yazdegerd was overjoyed to hear this, and rewarded them with royal jewels. Once the astrologers had left the court, the priests and ministers sat together and discussed what should be done. They believed that if the new prince did not take after his father, he would be a great and just king. But if his character turned out like his father's, he would ruin the whole country, and neither the priests nor the country's warriors nor the young prince himself would have an auspicious future. With good intentions in their hearts, they went to the king and said, "This splendid child is beyond any reproach or blame, and all the world is his to rule. Every country will pay him tribute. Look at a place where wisdom has ensured the country's peace and prosperity, and choose someone noble from there to bring him up. Then this fine prince will learn the skills he needs, and the world will rejoice in his rule." Accordingly, the king summoned envoys from every country, and at the same time he sent his own men to Rome, India, China, and other civilized regions. One man went among the Arabs to study the nature of their life, and he searched for someone eloquent and wise who could bring Bahram up. Experienced sages came from every country and gathered at the Persian court. The king questioned them at length, made much of them, and assigned them living quarters. One night, 2 Arab princes, Noman and his father Manzur, arrived from their entourage. When all these visitors had assembled in pairs, they presented themselves before Yazdegerd and said, "We are your slaves, and will obey the words we hear from you. Who among us will be fortunate enough to take the king's son in his arms, and teach him the ways of knowledge, and to cleanse his heart of darkness?" Then each of his eloquent, experienced men, whether he was from Rome or India or Persia, whether an astrologer, a mathematician, or a philosopher, said humbly, "O just and wise, honorable king, we are all as the dust beneath your feet, and stand ready to act as your guide to knowledge. Look at us and decide which of us pleases you, which of us all will be useful to you." But Manzur said, We are your slaves, and our lives in this world are the king's. The king knows of our qualities, since he is a shepherd to us, and we are his flock. We are riders, warriors, tamers of horses, and we have no tolerance of so-called wise men. We are not astrologers or mathematicians. Our souls are filled with love of the king, and we trust in the quick Arab horses we ride. We are all your son's slaves, and we laud his glory." When Yazdegerd heard these words, he gathered his thoughts together, and came to a decision, and handed over Bahram into Manzur's keeping. He had a robe of honor made for Manzur, and exalted his head to the skies. The king of the Yemen horses was called, for at the door to the court, and all the plain in front of the palace was filled with camels, horses, litters, servants, and nurses for the baby. The whole area from the city gates to the court was decorated in royal fashion for the prince's departure. When Manzur arrived back in the Yemen, all men and women of the country came out and greeted him, and as soon as he reached his home, he began to search for worthy, well-born women to suckle the child. From among the noble Persians and Arabs, there he chose 4 accomplished women. 2 were Arabs, and 2 were Persians of royal descent, and these 4 prepared themselves to act as the baby's wet nurses. They suckled him for 4 years, and he grew satisfied and stout on their milk. They weaned him with difficulty, but still they continued to cuddle and caress him. When he was 7 years of age, the child said to Manzur, "My lord, don't treat me like a baby at the breast. Send me to teacher. There's work to be done. Don't leave me idle and useless like this." Manzur replied, "You don't need teachers yet, my lord. When it's time for you to be taught your lessons, I won't leave you to play in the palace and boast about your games." But Bahram answered him, "Stop thinking of me as an idle good-for-nothing. It's true, I'm young in years, and my chest and shoulders aren't like a hero's, but I have some knowledge. You're old in years, but you don't have much wisdom, and my nature isn't what you think it is. Don't you know that when someone is ready to seek things out, he chooses what he has to do first and concentrates on that? If you're going to be always waiting for the right time, your heart will lose everything good. Everything will be out of place, and nothing will come out right. It's the head that masters and matters for a human being. Teach me everything that a king should know. The beginning of righteousness is a knowledge of God, and blessed is the name who is wise and has knowledge." Manzur stared at him in astonishment and murmured the name of God to himself. He immediately sent a message to Shuristan, who sought out 3 teachers who were highly respected there. One was to teach the boy how to write, and so to cleanse his heart of darkness. Another was to instruct him in the management of hawks and hunting cheetahs, which delights the heart. Another would teach him how to play polo, shoot with a bow, fight in combat against enemies, and tug his reins to right and left so as to control the horse on the battlefield. These learned men presented themselves to Manzur and described to him the things they could teach. Manzur handed the young prince over to them for instruction, and he learned so quickly that his abilities were soon those of a grown man. His intellect grasped whatever they said to him, and by the time he was 18, he had grown into a brave youth, as splendid as the sun. He no longer needed his instructors to tell him anything about hunting with hawks and cheetahs, or about how to ride and attack on the battlefield. He said to Manzur, "My pure-hearted protector, you can send these teachers back to whence they came from." Each of the men was given a number of presents, and they left Manzur's court in good spirits. Later, Bahram said to Manzur, "Have the Arabs bring their horses before me, and make them tug on the reins and flourish their lances. Then they can put a price on whichever horse pleases me, and I'll pay more for it than they ask." Manzur replied, "You're an ambitious young prince, and the herder of my horses is at your service as his lord is too. I have no objection if you want to buy an Arab horse." Bahram said, "You have a notable and noble reputation, and may you live prosperously for many years. I'll choose a horse. I don't have to rein in when going down a slope, one I can make sure-footed at a gallop, and then I'll have him outstrip the winds of spring. But before he's properly trained, It's not right to force a horse to gallop too fast. Manzur said to Noman, choose a number of horses, and as they're driven across the plain, watch out for a good mount for a warrior. Noman quickly brought 100 horses, of which he chose a number suitable to be ridden in battle. Bahram wandered among them, but whenever he mounted one that had the speed of the wind, it could not bear his weight. This continued until finally he settled on a chestnut horse that was both swift and broad-chested. He also chose a bay horse with a black mane and a tail that was as big as a sea monster, and Manzur paid a just price for the two of them. They were both from the woods named Kufa, and Bahram accepted the horses as a gift from him, and they glowed like the fires of Azar-Goshhasp. Manzur looked after the young prince as if he were the apple of his eye, and did not let even the wind disturb him. One day Bahram said to Manzur, you are a noble, well-intentioned man, but you hem me in with your excessive care and constant worry. Everyone we see has some secret sorrow that turns his face yellow with grief, and a free man's health is revived by pleasure. So allow me this further pleasure then, the pleasure that cures all pains. Whether he's a prince or a warrior, a young man finds comfort and happiness with women. They are the foundation of our faith, and they guide young men towards goodness. Have 5 or 6 beautiful slave girls, as splendid as the sun, brought here so that I can pick 1 or 2 of them. I've been thinking, too, that I should have children. If I had a child, that would bring me some comfort. The king would be pleased, and men would praise me for it. The old man congratulated the young prince on his words, and had a broker hurry to the slave seller's shop. He brought back 40 Western slaves, each one a heart-delighting girl, a radiant sun. Bahram chose 2 of them, who seemed to be fashioned from roses and pale ivory, tall in their elegance and cypress slim. Their grace and loveliness delighted him. One played the harp, one seemed to Bahram's eyes bright as Canopus in the Yemen skies. Manzur bought both of them, and Bahram laughed and then blushed like a ruby from Badakistan. For a while, Bahram occupied himself solely with playing polo and hunting, and so it was that one day he went out hunting without any of his companions, taking with him only his harp-playing girl. Her name was Yazdegerd, and her cheeks were as red as wine. She sat with him on his mount, her harp in her hand. She was his heart's delight and desire, and his name was always on her lips. That day Bahram had asked for a brocade cloth to be draped across his camel's back, and that it be provided with 4 gem-studded stirrups, 2 of which were silver and 2 of gold. Beneath the quiver he had a slingshot, as he was adept at all forms of hunting. 2 pairs of deer appeared in front of them, and the young prince turned smiling at Yazdegerd and said, when I draw back the bowstring, which of these 2 do you think my arrow is to strike? There is a young female, and she has an old male companion. Yazdegerd replied, you are a lion of men, and a warrior doesn't fight against deer. But turn that doe to a buck with an arrow, and with another arrow make the buck into a doe. Then urge your camel forward, and as they flee from you, use your slingshot and strike one of the deer on the ear, so that she will rub it against her shoulder and lift up her foot to scratch the spot. And when she does that, if you want me to call you the light of the world, pin her foot, ear, and head together with 1 shaft. Bahram readied his bow and broke the silence of the plain with his cry. He had a double-headed arrow in his quiver, and as the buck fled before him, he shot the arrow so that it severed the buck's antlers. Instantly now, that is, the antlers were gone, and the buck looked like a doe. And Yazdegerd stared at Bahram in astonishment. Then he shot 2 arrows into the doe's head, so that they protruded like antlers, while the blood ran down over her muzzle. Next, he urged his camel toward the other pair. He fitted a pellet in the fold of his slingshot and loosed it at the ear of one of them. It was rightly pleased with his skill, because the deer immediately scratched at his ear, and Bahram notched an arrow to his bow. The shaft pinned foot, ear, and head together, and Yazdegerd's heart was wrung for the animal. Bahram pushed her from the saddle, and she fell headlong to the ground. He said, "You're nothing but a stupid harp player. What do you mean by setting me on such a task? If I had missed, I'd have brought shame on my lineage." He trampled her beneath his camel's hoofs, and blood spurted from her breast and arms. After this, he never took a slave girl hunting with him again. Another time, Bahram went out to the hunting grounds with a large group of companions, taking his hawks and hunting cheetahs with him. On a mountainside, he saw a lion clawing apart the back of a wild ass. He notched an arrow with 3 raven plumes to his bowstring and pinned the wild ass's heart and the lion back to one another. The lion lay drenched in blood atop the ass, and their hunter returned in triumph to the palace, his sword in his fist. Another time he went hunting with Noman and Mansur, together with a number of noble Arabs who had been his advisers for good and ill, and Mansur was eager for Bahram to display his horsemanship and hunting skills to them. They took a flock of ostriches running about like a herd of camels, and Bahram sped forward like the wind. He laughed as he took his bow in his hand and thrust 4 poplar wood arrows into his belt. One by one he notched them to the bowstring, and as each one found its mark, each one split the feathers of the former arrow. There was not a needle's width between where they struck. The nobles went forward and examined the prey, and found not a hair-breadth of space from arrow to arrow. Mansur cried out his congratulations to him, and did their companions. Mansur continued, "You fill my heart with such intense delight. You're like a rose blush blossoming in my sight, and may your moonlight glory never wane, your back remain unbent and free from pain." And as soon as they reached the palace, Mansur, whose thoughts elevated Bahram to Saturn's sphere, sought out painters from the Yemen. A number of them gathered at the court, and Mansur gave orders that they were to represent Bahram mounted on a camel, together with the ostrich wounded by his arrows. His slingshot was also to be there, as well as the lions, deer, and wild asses he'd brought down by his massive strength and skill. The ostrich's wounds, the Bahram's arrow, and the surrounding plain all lived together in a black ink brushed on silk. The picture was sent by mounted messenger to King Yazdegerd, and there the whole court crowded around to see his missive. They were astonished at what they saw, and called down blessings on Bahram and his skill. His father longed to see Bahram again, who seemed less a man than the glorious sun itself. The Lion Prince said to Mansur, "The longer I stay with you, the more I wish to see my father. My heart tells me that I'll be safe with him." Mansur collected together appropriate royal presents from his country, Arab horses and gold-gilded bridles, valuable objects, Yamani textiles and swords, as well as whatever precious stones the mines of Aden could provide. Bahram traveled with Noram, who was highly regarded by the king, until they reached the city of Yazdegerd. As soon as the king learned that his son Noram was approaching, he and his courtiers went out to meet him. When he saw his own son's glory, his fine body, his shoulders, his stature, his noble bearing, he was sunk in amazement. He chose lodgings for Noram and an appropriate place for Bahram. Day and night Bahram was with his father, and he was treated with such attentive kindness that he scarcely had to lift a finger. After Noram had been with the king for a month, he was ready to return home. Yazdegerd summoned him one night and sat down with him on the royal dais and said, "Mansur took great pains to bring Bahram up, and I shall reward him. He has been like an angel of good fortune to me. I delight in his intelligence and opinion, and I see his aim has always been wisdom. You have been with us for some time now, and your father must be watching the roads for your return. From the treasury he was given 50,000 gold dinars, together with royal clothes, from the stables 10 fine horses with gold and silver trappings. To these were added beautiful carpets, as well as other splendid gifts that were brought one by one and handed over to Noram. Yazdegerd was happy to open the doors of generosity and to reward Noman's entourage with gifts too. According to the rank, he then wrote a letter worthy of his royal state to Mansur, thanking him for the guidance and friendship he had shown to Bahram, and saying that he has now lifted up his head with pride because of his son, and would attempt to repay the debt he owed. Bahram Gur also wrote a letter to Mansur, saying, "My life here is hard and bitter. I didn't expect my father to treat his inferiors in the way he does. I'm not like a son here or a servant, and I'm not like one of his subjects who's happy simply to be at court." He told Noman what he had seen in private of the king's evil ways. Noman returned to Mansur and gave him the king's letter. Mansur kissed it and touched it to his forehead. He was overjoyed to see the gifts that had been sent and repeatedly expressed his wonder and gratitude. Then, in private, Noman told Mansur of Bahram's complaints, and when a scribe read out his letter, Mansur's face turned pale. He immediately wrote Bahram a carefully worded answer, saying, "My noble lord, see that you don't oppose your father. Be content with what he's done, whether for good or ill. Obey him and be prudent. Noble men escape evils through patience, and a man must be wise in such cases. To some of the heavens send a heart filled with kindness, to others a vengeful heart and a frowning face. That is how God has made the world, and we must walk as he directs us to walk. I'm sending you whatever you might need by way of gold and royal jewel. My wealth is not worth your suffering. See that you keep your heart free from pain. I'm sending 10,000 dinars as a gift, and also the slave girl who delighted you so much and who was like a guide to you, so that she may brighten your soul's darkness. Whenever you need money, don't burden the king with your request. I can send you much more than I have done, and other kinds of wealth from our kingdom too. Strive to be ever more obedient and humble. You can't privily separate the king from his evil ways." Mansur sent an eloquent and loyal Arab horseman, and they reached Bahram with the money and Bahram's favorite slave. Bahram was pleased at this, and his sorrows disappeared. Wisely, he followed the Arab king's advice and served his father obediently by night and day. One day, when Bahram had been standing before the king at the banquet for a long time, he was overcome by the need for sleep. When his father saw Bahram's eyes closing, he shouted at him in fury, "Take him away! He can't act as he ought. Never again will he appear at court. Lock him in his palace. He's unfit for the royal throne and leadership in war." For a year, Bahram stayed in the palace, sick at heart, and never saw his father's face except during the festivals of Nowruz and Sada, when he was simply one of the crush of people who appeared before the throne. This was the situation when the Roman envoy Tanush arrived at court with the cash and slaves that had been sent in as tribute. The King of Kings welcomed him and assigned him suitable living quarters. Bahram sent him a message. "You are a noble and successful man. Something has made the king angry with me, and I've been excluded from his presence, even though I've done nothing wrong. If you intercede on my behalf, the king might look kindly on me, so that my fortunes will flourish again. He might send me to the people who brought me up, because Mansur means more to me than my own mother and father do." Tanush agreed to help him, and Bahram, whose heart had been so troubled was overjoyed. He was freed from his miserable confinement, and after distributing many goods to the poor, made preparations to leave. He gathered his people together, and in the darkness of night they set off like the wind. He said to his friends, "Thanks be God that we managed to get away, and that we are safe from fear." When he arrived in the Yemen, men, women, and children came to him, Noman and Monzer and an escort of riders bearing lances set out, and the crush of people around Bahram was so great that the world grew dark and the dust they sent up. The two of them dismounted, and Bahram told them of his sorrows and hardships. Monzer wept to hear his words, and then asked after the fortunes of the king. Bahram replied, "May he never realize how evil his star is." Bahram spent his time in festivities and on the playing field, in largesse and training for combat. And here I end my tale for today. But I'll be back tomorrow with more tales. Many more tales. Until then, my friends,